All right. Welcome back to Wisdom for the Church. I'm John, and thank you for joining me for another Thursday late stream at 9:15. So glad for those who are here now or will be here later. Feel free to leave comments in the chat. They always do encourage me, and they do add a little bit of fuel for the fire of the conversation. So very much appreciate you being here. And this might be multiple episodes with this one because there's so much material that I was like, oh, dang, there's a lot here. So I don't know how much I'll get to in one actual sitting here, but what the topic is tonight is feminism and the history of feminism. We're talking about, the West, mostly Europe and the US, but the history of kind of modern feminism, its impact on society, and maybe even some of the impact on the church. And yeah, so that's what we're on tonight. And basically, what I will follow, here are some important faces here. If you can see on your screen, what I'm going to be following is kind of the 7 points, down at the bottom there, which we'll get to. But let's see, we got a comment from Joe says, "Risnum with the nism, Johnny." That's a mouthful, Joe. Thanks, man. That was awesome. But yeah, here, if you can see it on the screen, 3 kind of big figures. The first one, I'm going to get her name wrong or how to pronounce it, but Mary, I think it's Wolf something or other. Someone, if they see it in the, someone could comment it. But yeah, Mary Wollstonecraft. I was going to say Wolfenheimer, but that's definitely not true. Wollstonecraft, she's kind of like a precursor to feminism. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. She was an English writer. And so she was probably just before the popular feminism movement in the late 1800s, but she was an inspiration for a lot of figures, including the probably 2 most foremost figures of first wave feminism, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. First wave. I thought I was going to do all waves that have ever been waved, but then I realized, oh, that's a lot of that's a lot of material. So first wave feminism. And that middle lady on the screen there is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then Susan B. Anthony. You've probably heard their names, but they're probably the foremost 2 feminists of the first wave of feminism in the late 1800s and early 1900s, kind of terminating in suffrage, women's right to vote in like 1920. That's kind of when first wave was considered done, and the second wave was on the horizon. But obviously they look like really happy women in those photos, so I'm sure they were doing something right. So yeah, those are the big 3 from what I can tell. There's other figures, but kind of like when I did, I don't know what recent stream it was, but there are, socialism, was it, or leftism? I can't remember. There are certain figures that I just had to leave out, right? Because there's so many, or atheism, that's what it is. There's so many massive figures that it's like, I can't pick them all. So here are 3 big ones, particularly the bottom 2 is what I'm looking at. But so without further ado, before we get into a little bit of the history, I wanted to make 2 big points. This is from what I believe is a biblical perspective and my perspective as a biblical Christian about feminism in its actual substance, not what it claims to be, but what I actually believe it to be, right? And so we have to have this framework, I believe, as Christians when it comes to feminism. Not all bad ideas or even evil movements are wrong all the time. And I think you could say that with certain things of feminism, right? Like there's going to be a diagnosis of real problems, like husbands that have a tendency to abuse their wives. That's a real problem, and there needs to be solutions to that. But they basically have terrible solutions, like a lot of evil ideas and evil movements. They might identify some right problems and even get some right solutions, but in general, they throw out the good system and replace it with one that is inherently wrong and therefore evil. And that's feminism. So 2 of the big points that I have with feminism, I think if we get these, we kind of get the whole thing. And that is this: as a framework, think of, a forest rather than the trees, the big picture of feminism. Feminism is, as a framework, first and foremost, a rejection of the concept of male headship, particularly in the home. So I think if we get this, we understand a lot of the foundations of feminism, and this would not even be controversial. This would be, yep, we believe this. Feminism is first and foremost a rejection of the concept of male headship, particularly within the home. And if we get this, we understand the foundational problem with feminism. It is a rejection of God by rejecting his good design, right? So it's a rejection of male headship in the home. And naturally, headship in the home is going to have ripples in society, right? Because we move as household units. I'm going to get to that and how that was a major societal, I think, assumption in the 17, 18, 1900s, which was why there were so many disparities, alleged injustices. But that's the foundation of feminism. We reject male headship in the home. It's subjection. It's a kind of slavery. And in substance, that is a rejection of God by rejecting his design for how things are to work. Of course, in feminism, whether it's militant feminism or even just kind of a more mild form, marriage still occurs. Men and women still get together. They cohabitate and they even, sign the contract, and it's still legitimate marriage before God. But the headship is not there, and often it's whose role is what happens here. And marriage becomes, I believe, we're kind of trying to have our cake and eat it too. You can't have, as a woman, for example, the protection of a man without really the respect of him being the leader, knowing how to protect, if that makes sense. So roles get confused. I know if you work for any company where there's not a legit hierarchy where we know who does what and who reports to who and who takes the blame for this, right? Who ultimately is responsible, then things get chaotic really quick because every man's responsibility is no man's responsibility. And so feminism, in my estimation, does that to marriage. But that's point number one: rejection of the concept of male headship, rejecting God by rejecting male headship, and saying, and even using godly, pious language, and yet rejecting that there is a hierarchy in the home is rejecting God's good design. And so it's lip service, right? It's honoring God with their lips, but their hearts are far from him, even if motives are, deceived that they think they're good. So feminism, number two, that's number one, denial of male headship in the home, which naturally will have ripple effects to male headship in other institutions like church and government. Number two, feminism assaults womanhood and assaults femininity. It assaults womanhood and assaults femininity. What do I mean? I think that feminism is kind of a reverse engineering of the feminine nature. And what it essentially produces is just different type of men. It's, but women can't be men. And so it ends up being a perverted form, kind of like a weird Frankenstein figure. And it's not like men haven't been affected, obviously, by feminism too. Men have been made effeminate. Women have been in a very masculine form for quite some time. Confuses a lot of things. Brooke says, oh, there we go. Vortex, no, he's God. The fool says there is no God. Vortex, remember that. That's the basics of knowledge. Brooke says, I remember learning my honors courses that the cult of domesticity and how women were enslaved to their homes. Interesting. Was that like a book, like in terms of, was there a particular figure that taught that, or was it just like this is generally in society's history, there was this cult of domesticity? But yeah, that sounds kind of like feminism, especially modern 101, but even from its foundations, first wave, which we'll get to. So I believe that that's a good framework about feminism. So the first one, to be honest, I don't even think is debatable that, even from jump, feminists, those who were about women's liberation and women's rights, would argue against this. Male headship in the home is a type of oppression, basically. It's something that we actually don't want. It's been forced upon us, and that's one of the big narratives of history. We've been kept down by this evil patriarchal society. I don't even think that's debatable. Number two, I believe in practice, feminism assaults womanhood and femininity because it takes some of the most primary realities of the female's nature and basically tells her that these are shackles that she needs to avoid, or at best, she needs to pursue this thing while also pursuing every other last dream that she wants, particularly the idol at this point these days of career. And that, again, in practice becomes we want to have our cake and eat it too. No one can do it all. And the same is true for men and women. We have to have a role, and we have to know what we have to primarily focus on, and then secondarily, and then thirdly, and that, and all that. And so if we think we can just be complete perfect career women and be also present physically a lot of the time with the kids. It's just not going to work. Um, as opposed to being enslaved. Oh man, yeah. So again, the liberation that's happened in our society, not to get off track, but this is good. We have been liberated. I'm a man, so I guess I was always free, right? But women have been liberated, and now we do have the Excel spreadsheets and Zoom meetings, and it is nothing short of the dream. And this is what, I'm sure Susan B. Anthony was envisioning when she said, "I need to get out of these shackles," right? So we've really won a lot for women. Accomplished so much with feminism. So hierarchy was seen as oppression from Jeff. So those are the big two. I believe, like, if you really get down to it, what the early sources of feminism, some of these major figures were arguing, and therefore where it logically went in society, was first and foremost, this headship in thing, the home is shackles. Headship in the home is shackles, was the belief. And I believe in practice, it would not be argued this way, but I believe that in practice, feminism assaults womanhood and femininity. It's a reverse engineering. It's a war on womanhood. And, we see the fruit today, really. You think about the virtues of a good woman in Scripture in the Bible, and those are laughed at and scoffed at today. And the very exact opposite is what is promoted, right? We've all heard ad nauseum about being a boss babe. That's what you got to do. Aquila, good to see you. Caught alive on time. Woo. That's right. Definitely a woo. And Brooks says, don't forget Microsoft Outlook. That is underrated. Microsoft Teams, right? A whole, a trail you can blaze with gifts. And so, you've been freed from the shackles of domestic life to be able to send funny pictures on Microsoft Outlook. So really, feminism's batting 1,000. With all that, I did want to, I may have this on the slide here. Here's something funny. Just a photo of a suffrage movement for voting rights back in the Woodrow Wilson years. So, just a few years probably before that would be passed in 1920. But you get picket signs. I think this is a real photo. And then there's one guy in the middle, this one random man. And if you could zoom in on it, he's grinning from ear to ear. I don't know if he was trolling it or what, but he looks hilarious. So I thought that was funny. But I did want to read something, because I'm not just blowing smoke with the marriage is the starting point here in family and household, and therefore it's rejection of God. I wanted to read something that was from Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the primary drivers of first wave feminism. And this was from basically a message she gave at a function about marriage and about divorce, marriage and divorce. And so I thought this was excellent. Just it's so clear on what her beliefs were. So she said this: hence, when he, that is the man or a man in society, when he expresses the fear that liberty to woman would upset the family relation, he acknowledges that her present condition of subjection is not her own choosing, and that if she had the power, the whole relation would be essentially changed. And this is just what is coming to pass, the kernel of the struggle we witness today. This is a woman's transition period from slavery to freedom, and all the social upheavings before which the wisest and bravest stand appalled are but necessary incidents in her progress to equality. We have changed the foundations of the church, too, without uprooting the religious sentiment in the human soul. The discussions and dissensions in the church filled the world with despair for ages and delude nations in blood, but the Protestant right of individual conscience and judgment is a result. And though the cardinal points of our faith have been changed and changed again, yet we have a church still. So we shall have the family after the present idea of man's headship is repudiated and woman set free. Right. So you see, she touches on church, and these things do go hand in hand. They really do, because God sets the boundaries, and he sets what institutions in society are, primary and most valid. And, church is one of those, along with family, along with civil authorities. And so church is being uprooted. I think she's talking about male headship there too. But she talks about in that first, paragraph there, subjection is not of her own choosing. Basically, we are in this submissive role and we don't want it, is what she's saying. This is societally forced. And then that last part is the most clear. So we shall have the family after the present idea of man's headship is repudiated and woman set free. And I do thank the Lord for, Stanton in this regard, that she's honest and very clear about what she's fighting for in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This idea of male's headship, the husband's headship in the family, we need to be set free from that. So as you see, I'm not making it up that I think this is a foundational framework to understanding feminism, because all of the sort of tentacles, the ripples that go out into society, are from the first and foremost institution that God has set place in society, and I believe was assumed to be the primarily not only societal unit, but also the primary like societal endeavor in centuries past, right? Because we'll get into this, but a household, I don't know when we exchanged the term household for now what we call, at best, like family unit, but I think we lost something in that. So when I think family unit, I think, well, first of all, yes, the family unit is the core of any society. Even pagan societies like will have some stability by the natural order that God has given, by the family unit. Mothers and fathers have children, they raise them to be productive members, and that keeps going, right? But to me, family unit sounds a bit more passive and a bit less like it has less of a direction, less of an end goal and a telos. But a household to me is an enterprise. It is an enterprise where we all have our roles. We are moving towards something. We have an identity as this family. Like the Andersons have this identity, or the Strausses have this identity, and all of us, should have the identity, of course, of honoring God. But the Andersons are going to have a slightly different way of honoring God in terms of our gifts and talents and abilities, right? And same with the Robinsons and whoever else. And so household to me communicates direction and communicates something that's like actually kind of a miniature economy. Whereas family unit is often, it's something like, well, we get together on Friday nights and play like board games, and we watch, like we have a movie night, and we have dinner a few times a week. Like we still have that, but I think we lost something is what I'm trying to say there. So that's Katie Stanton. I think a really important quote by her, for sure. So, we're getting into some of the more major things that happened with first wave feminism. And basically, anything I put in bold, I think are the big points. But, I won't get more detailed than this other than to say, we just remember that it was late 19th and early 20th centuries, right? Sort of terminating in 1920 with the, I believe it was 19th Amendment. So, you cannot ban the right to vote based on sex, essentially. So women right to vote, broadly at least. So that's when it was 1800s to early 1900s. Some of the backdrop, which this I think is interesting, were the French Revolution, the temperance movement. In other words, like banning or at least limiting alcohol consumption and sale due to various factors. Abolitionism, the abolition of slavery. And then I mentioned earlier, Mary Wollstonecraft's classic work in terms of feminist perspective, a vindication of the rights of women, seen as, trailblazing at the time. And so the basic reason these are precursors is that women were involved in these sort of revolutionary movements. And, to be clear, I'm not the type that believes that like women should have no place in our economy. I'm not the type that doesn't believe that women should have no voice in any respect in our society. We'll get to Proverbs 31, but all things need to be done in God's order and by his design. And that's what feminism calls evil. What God calls good and God calls normal and God calls something that will be to our benefit, feminism calls the oppressive force. That is the patriarchy, that terrible word patriarchy. Aquila, going back to I think the Stanton quote, says, what a sentence, without uprooting the religious sentiment in the human soul. You're right. The religious sentiment is still there, and now it's focused inward. That's true. Yeah. What do I want rather than what does God say? What does God want? Family unit makes me think of distancing language, like low income housing unit. Yeah, it's more, it feels almost like communism-y. Like we're just this little group of comrades here. You got your group of comrades, I got my group of comrades, and then we'll go, worship Mao together later on in the square, and it'll be a great time. And then we'll go have our rice, like our 3 little pieces of rice, and we'll all have a good time. And we'll sing about workers' rights. The family unit's great. Joe says it's meant to be an estranging phrase, antiseptic and bland. That's a good way to put that. Yeah. Household, like we need to get back to that. Like we're something, we're moving towards something, right? Like you raised your kids and you realize, my son tends to have these giftings, and I'm not going to force him to do this, that, and thing, but I'm going to try to nurture that in the admonition of the Lord, like to know the word of God. And also, hey, son, I see this in you, and here's how I really think God can use you. Let's keep exploring this, right? And you see that your daughter has something over here. Let's keep exploring this. And if someone wants to do something that's not aligned with God's will, like your daughter says, hey, I want to be a preacher, you say no. Or if your son says, hey, I want to be a woman, you say no, right? So yeah, that's raising your kids. It's that simple. No, it's not that simple, but you get the idea. So these are some big movements, right? Like beforehand, leading up to feminism. For Susan B. Anthony, I believe she was involved in like an abolition, I'm not going to say seminar, rally would be a better way to say it. And she was barred from speaking or being there because she was a woman, which spurred her on to, develop, more feminist tendencies and then fight for the rights of women, basically. So, yeah, that's kind of where she came from. The big one is number 3, suffrage. And again, 1920, 19th Amendment, American women receive the right to vote. And oh yeah, I did want to say, so for number 3, 4, and 5, so suffrage, property, education, I wanted to say something that I think we miss a lot of times, because the way that feminism in terms of first wave is presented is it was a fight for rights in some sort of vacuum a lot of times. But here is what I wanted to remind us of, because I think this is the context that is lost. And this isn't me saying that there weren't problems, or that like men didn't abuse their wives or anything like that. Of course, that happens because of sin, right? But that doesn't mean you fix a problem with a sinful solution, which is what feminism is, because it denies male headship in key institutions that God has set in place. So for these categories like suffrage, etc., we must remember the fact that in centuries past in the West, the concept of the household was the foundational societal enterprise. And there were assumed definitions of what a household entailed, including male headship and probably family representation by the patriarch, by the male, by the husband, basically, and father. And so I think the household and what is assumed in what a household is, that is, we're something with the direction. The male is the head, and he protects. He also has the authority. He loves his wife. He cares for his children, all these things, but he sets the direction under God. The fact that was what a household was, and he represented them, is what probably led to a lot of these so-called disparities in society. And that's what's missed, is that there was a representative nature, from what I can gather, in centuries past. It's clearly been lost today. I mean, at all. Like, you're barely even allowed to say who wears the pants, much less you're like, I'm the leader of our family, and what I say will set the direction, and they will fall in line. Right. But I think that's why there were things like a lack of property rights or a lack of right to vote, because society was seen as households moving in a certain direction, and that you had to have some kind of skin in the game in order to do certain things. And we've lost that, right? Because we basically cling to every last right we could ever have, and even things that aren't our rights these days, without having any sort of sometimes bare minimum threshold to enter into, right? I mean, we see those who are illegals voting, for example, right? Like, that's clearly should not be happening, but that's because we cling to rights and things that even aren't rights so much today, without any sort of responsibility attached or barrier to entry. And one of those, for example, one of these things about the household was the property ownership for married women. I think I have this on a slide. So there was a time in U.S. history where this was not the case, and maybe it's not on the slide. It might not be on the slide. I don't think it is, because I'm so smart. But I'm going to read something, because I think this is really helpful, because it opened up a lot for me. So basically, property ownership for married women developed in Britain and in the U.S. Basically over time in the 1800s. So this is what is written about Britain, but you can apply it to the U.S. as well. So coverture, that is a common law principle in Western culture, which probably came from English common law, was overturned in first wave feminism. So here's what that is. During the 18th and most of the 19th centuries, married British women, and probably American, lived under the conditions of coverture. This made a husband and wife one under the law and gave husbands financial and legal control over their wives. Under coverture, women lost all control of their property once married, unable to buy, sell, own, or inherit anything they possessed before. The pursuit of a career was almost impossible for women because, under coverture, they had no ability to sign contracts, have legal control over incomes, or other processes that are essential to earning income. These conditions were not applied to unmarried, that is, single or widowed women, who had marginal autonomy under the law for owning property. It goes on. In 1868, a bill was presented to British Parliament that gave married women the same rights as unmarried women. So it goes on to say, it allowed for married women to keep their wages and investments independent of their husbands, inherit small sums, hold property either rented or inherited from close family, and made both parties liable for children. Although this was a step in the direction of women's right, married women still did not have full financial independence. Most of their finances and property were still, by and large, controlled by their husbands. So you see, like, coverture was basically the wife becomes, grafted in, you might say, to her husband and was considered his property legally. And so there's one bank account controlled by the husband, one group of financial decisions ultimately controlled by the husband. The wife couldn't buy, sell, own, or inherit anything. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know the ins and outs of it, but basically they're seen as one with the husband as the head. And so while I'm sure we could have some disagreements on how exactly that applied, on a base level, there's not much in the coverture idea that seems necessarily evil to me. It actually seems, at least on a basic level, a good thing. I'm sure things can get too controlling. I'm sure you could violate the dignity of women if you don't have some checks and balances, right? Like any government should. But as a basic concept, that seems to be right. That at the very least, the man should have the final say over household decision makings with finances, all these sorts of things. These days we're probably, a modern form of it would be like, hey, we have a joint bank account, but we're both going to have access to it. And, if we're going to make a purchase, like, you need to ask me, other than, basic things that we're going to be needing regularly, like groceries or clothes or this or that. Like, you need to run things by me so that we can keep this train going in the right direction for the good of ourselves and our kids, right? I think that'd be like a modern application of that principle, in our setting, which is ultra feminized. But coverture was gone, basically. And so now you've got what was massively hierarchical comes to be, not even close. And there's going to obviously be dissension there. And then education rights too. I didn't research too much on that one, but basically, again, the property was for married women. So unmarried already had, I think, some property ability there. But married women became one kind of in their husband's household, which seems very biblical. Education also was opened up to women a lot more in first wave feminism. Again, didn't research that one as much, but even if we could say that there were things that were too far, or there weren't any checks and balances or something along those lines, which I'm sure if you go back in history, I'm sure we could find, oh yeah, there needed to be a check on this, because I could easily see a husband just abusing his wife if we didn't have a law in place here. But, ignoring those sorts of things, the basic principles are pretty good. It's male headship, and it's, yeah, I do trust your leadership, and you're going to lead our family in a general direction that we need to go. So that's kind of what's going on with those three. I wanted to mention that because if we don't realize that households and representation, kind of like a federal headship almost by the husband, was an assumption for maybe all of human history, I think, until, the last probably 3 decades, 3 generations, that is, then we're going to be lost. Like, we really will see all these men as tyranny, but in reality, they were probably thinking, a lot of them, I'm actually protecting my family, by leading them in a way that I think will be honorable in society. It's actually honorable that I'm protecting them from certain things that I don't think they should be involved with, right? let's see. Brooks says the phrase "quiet women rarely make history" keeps painfully coming to mind. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll get into this a little bit later too, but yeah, I mean, modern women, and there's plenty of things to say about modern men too, but modern women, I mean, I don't know. All the encouragement is to be loud and brash and sexually promiscuous. I think that's the only thing you get. And I really didn't think like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even that it could get worse than the model that had been given to men, which is just like be Homer Simpson, be a complete dud. But man, it's a competition because you all have nobody. I mean, I feel like in my childhood, you guys had some women that were like moderately okay, right? Like at least in the sitcoms, some of the sitcoms, at least the wife wasn't too domineering, even if the husband was an oaf. Like she still kind of submitted to him and loved him. Like you had at least something, but that's been gone. That's gone. It's just boss babes. It's just disobedience, rebellion. I'm going to read some of these Aquila comments. I generally do not understand the instincts to want to force your way into somewhere where you're unwanted. I understand it's an injury of pride, but like who wants to be where they're unwanted? Good point. Good point. You go on to say that a pastor or deacon I was listening to once said that in Genesis, where the woman is cursed to desire her husband, it's not a desire for him per se, it's a desire for his headship and authority. I have heard that. Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to bear itself out practically. That is most certain. I cannot confirm or deny that's a proper reading, but that's what certainly that's what I just said. Yeah, that's what it plays out 100% all the time. I think some of the advancements for women are very good and are good exceptions for women who are in unstable circumstances. Yeah, feel free to add some more meat to that, Brooke, because again, I'm not saying every last thing that's ever happened with all this is wrong, but a broken clock is right twice a day type of thing. And if we're throwing out patriarchy, we're just basically saying, hey, the basic design for how a society should function, gone. And God's not going to bless that. However, some of this women in this movement are seriously demonic. But feel free, Brooke, add to kind of what you think the good advancements were. I'm interested to hear that. I mean, one that I think, like education. I think that's a principle in Scripture. I'm not necessarily saying yay public education, but the general concept of education for both men and women, I think, is legit. Just based on we're both image bearers, we're both instructed to know God, and part of that means knowing about God's world, all those sorts of things. Maybe you did. Yeah, you did say something like exceptions for widows, singles. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so and I think that's a false dichotomy. Not that you're promoting false dichotomy. That's a societal false dichotomy that we just have to reject. Basically, that patriarchy equals it's either patriarchy or it's justice, right? It's either abuse or it's defending against the patriarchy, and I just don't accept that. It's like free market economics is, I believe, God's just basic design for how things ought to work, right? You have a good, I have a service, or I have something to trade with you, and we make it work, and that's almost knit into the fabric of reality of living in God's world. There's kind of this natural market, right? That's there and probably needs a little bit of regulation, but it's not socialism. It's much more closer to free market economics. I think the same thing is true with patriarchy, right? Patriarchy is God's natural design, but it doesn't mean it won't be in a perverted form, right? And so we're aiming for a pure and honorable and virtuous and biblical patriarchy. Biblical patriarchy begets. Oh, I like that. Biblical justice. Amen. Owning land, bringing income without leaving the home. Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. So that's kind of a little bit about those. Hope that was helpful. Some of the history. These were the major things that were fought for. Suffrage is the big one. Yeah, and this is key. This is key. What Brooke said. Without even leaving the home, meaning you're not leaving your responsibilities at home to someone, not you. So people get up in arms, I guess, one way or the other, when it comes to women, quote unquote, in the workplace or women working. And I believe that from what I see in the testimony of Scripture, that it's not about whether she's working or not. It's about what the kind of solar system is revolving around of her life. And it would be, her husband steers the direction of that solar system. And what I mean is the home, and maintaining a home that honors the Lord and is a helpmate type of home to her husband, setting the direction to honor God and society, is what the telos, like the end goal, should be, right? And so if this working for a time, helps the household, and it's, seen in a very limited capacity, I don't see it as wrong, as long as the solar system is still revolving around mostly being at home, mostly being able to raise children in the admonition of the Lord, all these things. But a lot of times, I mean, 80-90% of the time, that's probably not what's happening in our society. So, in practice, that definitely isn't what happens. But I think that's the real thing. That's the real foundation, in my estimation, is kind of like the Proverbs 31 woman. Like, some of her life touched, obviously, the outside world. Right. But she was doing all of this with the kind of grand vision of helping her husband, of being a blessing to her household, and therefore her husband praised her, her children loved her, all these things. And that's where she was going, because she didn't belittle herself as an image bearer, which we shouldn't do, but also she stayed within the design that God has given her, which is stayed within her nature, basically. And the same thing should be true for men. So yeah, that's some stuff hopefully to think about. Regarding Katie Stanton and Susan Anthony, I'm going to read just a quote that Stanton, because I thought this was interesting. They were like partners, not sexually, but they were partners in the cause of undermining society and bringing gender confusion. So they're very good, laughably. But Stanton said this about Anthony and kind of how they worked together. So me and Anthony, we never met without issuing a pronunciamento on some question. In thought and sympathy, we are one, and in division of labor, we exactly complemented one another. In writing, we did better work than either could alone. While she is slow and analytical in composition, I am rapid and synthetic. I am the better writer, she the better critic. She supplies the facts and statistics, I the philosophy and rhetoric, and together we have made arguments that have stood unshaken through the storm of long years, arguments that no one answered. Our speeches may be considered the united product of two brains. And so, they've got this synthesis, kind of symbiotic relation going on. They're a well-oiled machine, is what she's saying. So that's just interesting to hear about them, the two probably most prominent figures of that time, considered feminist icons. They're actually both on the thumbnail of this video, so you can see if you can find them. There's a massive thing that happens, number 7 here, called the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848, which kicked off a lot of things. And I think it might have been before Anthony met Stanton, but Stanton and another woman led this conference, this gathering of like 300 women. And they basically had these declaration of sentiments, I think they called it. So we have these declarations about what we believe about justice and society and, all these sorts of things. So I just wanted to read some of them. I don't have them on the screen, but maybe you can just hear a little about what they're saying here. Here's one of the declarations. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. I'll say that again or read it again. History of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, and having basically absolute tyranny over her. And so this is seen as a grand historical narrative. Like, this is the story of history, or at least one of the major threads of history, according to Stanton and early feminism, is that man has had a tyrannical power over women, right? You heard her speech earlier that I referenced about basically we have to unshackle ourselves from headship, male headship in the home, and then we'll have the family. And so if you just combine even those two statements, and her being the one or two top foremost first wave feminists that set the table for their yes queens after them, how can we say that someone can separate any sort of mild feminism from this root? I don't think you can. And what I'm saying is, I don't think that we can basically say, well, I'm a Christian feminist, so it's different. Because if I think this is the core foundation of feminism right here. you're right. What they're talking about is we deny male headship. It's a tyrannical thing that's happened to suppress women in history. This is the grand overarching narrative that we've seen throughout history. Headship in the home is a tyranny. It's a shackling. It's oppression, right? All these things. If you can't separate yourself from that and say, well, I'm a Christian feminist, because that's one, I think that's naive. Number one, right? If someone's a Christian feminist, like, can you say that you're a Christian, I don't know, you know, mustache man from the 40s? Enter that term here. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on YouTube, right? Well, I'm not one of those types. I just believe in National Socialism. Like, okay, or I'm just a nationalist, right? No, because you can't separate, little parts of an idea from the main idea. That would be naive, right? Or to say, it's like when people talk about, well, critical race theory, which is racist in and of itself, is a useful tool for understanding society. You're playing with such dangerous things that you're going to be burned by it. Why? Because you can't take out little kernels of truth from something that's overarchingly evil. Like, you can say this is true, but you better not be a part of that movement or associate with that movement, because you're going to get burned. That's seen, I think, time and time and again, just in history. Like, it's just naive. A lot of times. Keela says, thank you for this. Super interesting, especially now when people give a lot of grace to first wave and lay all what you're talking about with the weed of second wave. Yeah. And that's one thing that I've definitely come to believe, even if there are some good kernels in there, right? Like we're talking about, first wave was first and foremost a rejection of male headship. And that's patriarchy and it's father rule or father lead. And if you are a biblical Christian with any sort of honesty, intellectual integrity to you, I think you have to say that God's world is one that is designed to be patriarchal. If we have an argument about it, let's say the Lord's Prayer, right? Our Father. Okay, that settles it. We just prayed to our Father. Yeah, but first wave feminism, it gets a pass a lot of times, and I think that's because we're so baked into it at this point, that we're almost scared, to be honest, about saying what we maybe even truly believe, and don't have the ability to articulate, which is why some of these primary sources, I think, are helpful. Looking back at them, Brooke says a lot of first waivers just didn't like what the Bible said what women should look like. Meekness was not in their vocabulary. Amen. So a little bit more about, let's see here, the declarations of the Seneca Falls Convention. We have these declarations. He has never, that is the man, never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has deprived her of the first rights of a citizen, the elective franchise again, and he has oppressed her on all sides. And people say that feminists are man haters. I don't see where they get that from. Good night. Oh. Okay. He allows her, this is one last one I saw, he allows her in church as well as state, but in a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry and, with some exceptions, from any participation publicly in the affairs of the church. And again, I don't know about that last part, publicly participating in the affairs of the church. I do think clearly in the New Testament, we see that Paul was thankful for women who taught younger women and were generally just faithful servants of the Lord, that there had to be some public element to that, right? That wasn't preaching, that wasn't wielding authority over men in any way, obviously. So like I said, could things have been too far? Of course. But again, that's not what she's saying, though. She's saying a subordinate position in church as well as state. And these are, church, clearly only those who are elders are going to be men. Deacons, the diaconate, I believe that from an office perspective, I don't really believe that it's too unclear that it can only be men. We're all deacons in a sense, we're all servants, but I believe as an office, 1 Timothy 3, Titus, they're pretty clear on that one as well. But even when we think about, the government, civil authority, it is a ministry of the sword. And in general, that is going to lend itself to the masculine the masculine nature, basically, because it's not one primarily of mercy, but of justice, right? And that tends to be one where a man needs to be in charge. That's the general witness of Scripture, even though there are exceptions, which, like Deborah, was even a judgment on. I think it was it Barak? I can't remember. Stanton. Oh, its roots. Joe says its roots straight satanic, straight out of the demonic playbook, usurp the created order that God had clearly established and attempt to set up a construct of its own. Yep, I definitely agree with that. Right. Stanton changed God's pronoun in their women's Bible. She was a God hater. Is that a true thing? I didn't know that. That's a nugget right there, Brooke. Aquila, I wonder if these false teachers who claim the Lord declared the woman would crush the head of the serpent. Get it from that. Oh, good night. Yeah, maybe if you guys have a what's the name of their Bible? Is it just the woman's Bible? Because I was not aware of that, but that's fascinating and blasphemous. But that's where we are. So I wanted to read, that a lot of things I've read, I guess I've focused a lot of what Stanton was saying, but that's just because she's so clear. And I really appreciate that, as a historical ability to look back and be like, no, here's what was said. Here's what, what we believe. And so I wanted to, read some things, read some scripture into these things and make some comments on first wave feminism. It's just called the Woman's Bible. So pick it up next to your Joel Osteen devotion. You'll be well on your way. So here's some scripture. I'm not getting into the details of the exact interpretation of this, okay? But I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 11, a few verses. Speaking of a wife, since it is disgraceful, Paul writes, for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man or man of woman, for as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. Easiest, I think, passage ever to exegete seems. But, regardless of whether someone is arguing for head coverings perpetually continuing in the church or not or whatever, a few things are most definitely clear here. One is, male headship is the principle underneath the practice, right, of head coverings in the church. It's a hierarchy. It's an authority thing. And, verse 7, I think it's safe to say at the very least that men, it says, man is the image of God and glory of God. Woman is the glory of man. Man, we might say expresses or represents or conveys the image of God in a particular way that women do not. And it even says woman was created for man, not man for woman. And we see that even with Adam and Eve, right? He was not the helpmate. She was. He was the, priest in the garden. He was the representative of man to God. He was the prophet. He was representing God to man, or at least he should have been teaching the word to Eve, and yet he failed in that. But she was a helpmate to him, to set the direction, to be his helper in taking dominion, to being fruitful and multiplying, to subduing the earth and ruling over it. And that's the creation order that God set from the jump. And so it's basically repeated in a different form, I believe, in these verses in 7, 8, 9, 10 in 1 Corinthians. And so, just to basically reiterate the point that there is a hierarchy here, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually God ordained and it's good. If God has made something as a moral, law and something to be followed, we can say that it's good, even if, in our flesh, in our sinful bent, we don't like it. If I don't like something and it's biblical, though, that's on me. That's not on God, right? So that's one scripture just to keep in mind regarding, authority and headship are real. That's a real thing. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing to say it. We should say it with some I don't know, some gusto in our chest. Um, and here's 1 Peter 3. This is helpful, reminding us the beauty of, what true femininity is, I think. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, even so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, or dyeing your hair blue. I think some versions say that. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle, quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. There's a lot there. I've always found this passage to be so wonderful and clarifying, given our confused society. Maybe some people don't see it that way, but verse 4 is fascinating to me. I mentioned this earlier, but verse 4, let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with an imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. And of course, this is not talking about mere voice volume, although I'm sure that can actually follow, right? But this is talking about inwardly at peace before God and at peace in your submission to your head, who in this case is your husband, and your husband's head is Christ. And a gentle and quiet spirit accepts that gladly, not begrudgingly, right? And I said this earlier, the exact opposite is what we're taught, like women are taught in our culture the last 70 or so years. Be loud and proud, own the room, don't take any no for any answer. All those sorts of things are just part and parcel of what it means to be a true woman in our society today. But it's so satanic. Joe mentioned it earlier. Like, this is exactly opposite, really, of what the scripture teaches, of what blessed womanhood is. Titus 2. What is one of the major parts of kind of woman's teaching and discipling other younger women, like bringing them up in the faith, basically, is teaching them not just really the word, but really how to be keepers at home, which basically means how to be good wives and good members of a household. It's how to be good in the domain that God has called to be kind of your solar system, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a million things right with that. And so, yeah, Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And we don't have to shy away from those words. We really don't. We can say, God said that and it's good. Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. Likewise, women, do this for your husbands. And obviously, we have the husbands love your wives, and we get to that, right? But it's a good thing. Women, obey your husbands. As a man, I can say I'm not married, but as someone who's wanting to get married, all these things, I have found that I'm a pretty simple being. If you're just gentle and like me and follow my lead, that's like, it's the key to my heart. There's really not that much to it other than that. Just don't disrespect us as men. I feel like what's a huge one, don't disrespect us openly and publicly. If you have something to say, just approach us. Maybe we've gotten something wrong, and just smile. That's what, and we have a lot of responsibility on our plate to care for you and bring you up in your godliness. So there's a lot on our plate too. Obviously, the flesh wants us to be loud and belligerent, but the Bible teaches us to be meek and gentle. It's convicting, no lie. Yeah, absolutely, as it should be. It's part of the reason we have the word. It rebukes us, it cuts us to the heart. So I may have read this, I can't remember, but likewise, husbands, last part of that, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. I wonder, what if married couples read this every single day, once per day, just once per day, and they're married for 50 years? What might their marriage look like? I don't know. But if they followed it, man, there'd be a lot of blessing in that household. Isn't it like the word of God to bring so much clarity to a murky, confused world? I mean, 1 Peter 3 is so encouraging to me. It really is, because both women and men are given their nature and their role so clearly right? Men, what is our tendency to be? We can, in our flesh, be too domineering. We can be too short. We can lack gentleness, right? And that's why we're instructed, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, right? Patience, understanding, knowing about tone at certain times, all these sorts of things. Brooks says, it's honestly so easy as a woman to tear down your husband with your words, but encouraging words go such a long way. I will agree with that, honestly. And that's one thing with men in our culture. Like, honestly, most men, I think, get encouraged like 17 times in their life, maybe 18. Like, it's not that often. So encouragement does go a long way, I think, for men, just because our way of sharpening one another is usually like, you're fat, get skinnier, get more muscle, right? Um, but that's, yeah, encouragement goes a long way, for sure. Um, so one more thing I wanted to read, a scripture to balance things out, because I think this is sometimes lost, and I don't know if you can see it all, but I wanted to read Proverbs 31, about the Proverbs 31 woman, because this is so helpful. Helpful. Uh, you know, at the tail end of Proverbs here, an excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. I'm just going to go all the way to the end of verse 31. She's not afraid of snow for her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates while he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. So, verse 30, right? That's huge. I've heard that, when women grow up and they're, discipled with verse 30 or something close to it, right? Paraphrase of it. Things turn out pretty well a lot of times. Not always, but, the Lord works through his word. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Beauty is fleeting, but, God-fearing is timeless. And it's a type of beauty that will never leave. But I wanted to bring up Proverbs 31 woman, just because it does balance things out, right? So I don't think any even biblical patriarchy guy like myself is saying that women are like incapable of certain things, or um, lesser before God as an image bearer, like ontologically or anything like that. And there, you notice the word in Proverbs 31, like it's mentioned multiple times: strength, 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 strength of her hands. 17, she dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She's profitable. She sees a field and buys it. Obviously, there's some interaction, obviously with the outside world here, and yet I think if you really study Proverbs 31, so she's not diminished in her image bearing. She's not diminished in her capability. She's actually unlocked, you might say, by her husband, for her to be used for her best ability, for God's glory, and for her own joy and her husband's joy in the household. But it is within the realm of, like I said, that telos, that end goal of, we are uplifting this household, which is here to honor God. Her husband, she's not an enemy to husband, but a help to him, basically. That's why verse 11, the heart of her husband trusts in her. And so that's Proverbs 31, which I think it's so important, basically, to get that with that proverb. It's It's everything in its right context. It's not the belittling to the woman. It's the balance that we need to realize that God has made woman in a special way, and they express strength, but in a feminine way. And yet everything is within its own category and within its own place. And that's the Proverbs 31 woman. So she's not disrespecting her husband. She's not submitting to her husband. She's actually submitting to her husband. And part of that submission is actually a very fruitful and kind of exciting, you might say, life. She's known in society as someone who is doing great work for her household, and that's a beauty. She's like a crown on her husband's head, and it's certainly not a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing. Yes, Brooke with the claps says Proverbs 31. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I agree with this one, Akila. We can nuance 1 Peter 3 to death. Obey your husbands. If he says to sin, don't sin, obviously. If he says don't go to church, you need to go to church. But if it's something that's not explicitly sinful, of course, talk to your husband. I think men, you can take counsel from your wives. Understand that God has made her with a mind too, and she is your helpmate for a reason, right? But ultimately, obey your husband. It's interesting. I do wonder at times, how many decisions of a husband are questioned while a boss's decisions are almost never questioned, which you would think, if anything, would be the opposite. Like, I think you'd love your husband more than you would love your boss who doesn't probably pay you enough or whatever. Right. But hey, we're pretty baked into feminism. Joe has had a great life. He's up to 12 encouragements in 49 years. That is awesome, Joe. Someone can make it 13 if they want to in the comments. Get Joe up to 13. Hashtag get Joe to 13. What is something we all love about Joe? That's what I want to hear in the comments. Seriously, if Joe does not get a compliment or a encouragement tonight, that would be very, very, very depressing. Given Joe and given that he just said, "Come on, help me out." So yeah, a few more things with just some commentary I have. We read all that, so we got male hierarchies a legitimate thing in the marriage and other places in society, but we're focusing a lot on marriage here because again, I think that's the foundation of feminism is usurping that, and then everything else crumbles too. That's number one. Number two is a woman in general is seen as a crown for her husband's head if she has a gentle and quiet spirit. 1 Peter 3, obey your husbands. And yet, what that clearly cannot mean is doing nothing and being unproductive or not having an exciting life, because Proverbs 31, I mean, she's rolling. I mean, good night. Joanna Gaines is like, why can't I be like this? Don't look after Joanna Gaines, by the way. She's not a good example anymore, but, she's productive. That's my point. Excellent beard, Joe. Brooks says 13 encouragements for Joe in his life. Incredible. That's funny. Oh man, now it's 14. If that's you in your thumbnail, your beard is immaculate. That's hilarious. It's the same compliment. Interesting. So we know he has a good beard. I did, so there's a couple more things I wanted to say here just in response to all of the feminism stuff in the first wave. Hierarchies are not inherently bad, which I don't think we believe in practicality in our society these days. Hierarchies are not inherently bad. There are evil hierarchies in the world, right? Like if we make a racial hierarchy, you can't do this because you're X ethnicity. That's evil. That's partiality in a type of partiality that God says is sin. So there are evil hierarchies, right? Or if I, hire a certain person for like a job or something, and it's not because there's any sort of merit, but because they've bribed me, right? And it's a series of bribes or a hierarchy of bribers. That's like an evil hierarchy. We're built on false premises and corruption. But, like patriarchy as the father rule and lead is the way of nature according to God. Not every last institution and every last situation will be headed by men in God's design, in a patriarchy overarching rule of nature in the world, but in family, church, and generally civil government, which is enforcing good order in society, this will be father rule. I think history bears that out. I think nature I think even nature, you can understand that about civil authority. And even nature, I think you can understand the design to a limited degree, at least, about marriage, that man is head and woman is his helpmate. And she submits to him and he leads her. And that's a good hierarchy. Not all hierarchies are evil. And that's something I think we do have to get back to in our society, because I think we've bought into any disparity or something is like an injustice. And that's the false social justice stuff. Um, Not good. The concept of the household, another thing, was the foundational societal enterprise in centuries past and should be, I think, today. And the definition of what a household was informed a lot of these so-called disparities of justice that happened. Why did married women, not have property rights? Because it was a representative, like patriarchy, basically system of seeing the world. And so that's how it was. And so it wasn't, we're trying to keep you down. I'm sure for some it was, but it's basically, this is just how things have functioned for thousands of years. And one thing I will say regarding suffrage, so some of the fruit of feminism is, like you say, well, some of the good things, maybe they were rights, right to education, right to this. And to that, I would say to some degree, absolutely. But there's not a downside. And this could be offensive to some, but like for suffrage, for example, I think it was very soon after that women, within maybe like a year or something, prohibition was passed. And women had a huge part in that. I think that's pretty widely known historically. And what that vote was, from what I can tell, would be a wrong solution to some probably real problems, meaning alcoholism was probably pretty prevalent. Perhaps there was domestic violence going on by husband towards wives. And so we've got to do something about this. And rather than figuring out a better penalty code or something like that, we just ban alcohol, which seems to be, in my estimation, outside the jurisdiction of what a government actually has. The entire banning of alcohol, I don't believe, is something within the realm of a civil authority. And so, that would be an example, like the fruits of the female vote, and basically all households now having 2 votes, has been, well, like the overarching evidence is that more often than not, females vote Democrat. More often than not, males vote Republican. Of course, there's interchange. I understand that, but we're talking about aggregate. And so, if that's the aggregate, well, like, I guess what we gained the right for was voting to murder children, voting to not know what a man and woman is, voting to not have borders, and all these sorts of things in terms of like the overarching reality. So I don't know, to be honest, if that was the greatest thing to happen, or at least if there's like almost no barrier to entry to voting. Like, there's sometimes I wonder at times, I'm not even joking, like, would it be better if I couldn't vote? I don't own property. There's certain things I've not done. I'm not married. I don't have a family right now. Is it possible it would be better if someone like me couldn't vote? Because I probably have less skin in the game than the family who has 3 children. I don't know. I've thought about that. I don't know the answer to that. But it seems like we've lost, along with the suffrage, universal suffrage, it's just we've lost any barrier to entry, because, again, we see any disparity or hierarchy as inherently evil. Yeah. So that's a little bit about the one thing I've also often thought about. I'm no economist at all, but when it comes to second wave feminism and workplace norms and equal pay and all that, it seems like that is a surefire way to almost double the workforce and therefore pretty much get half the pay for most people. Maybe I'm missing something, but I would think that would be the case, because if employers only have a certain amount of money and they have to pay a certain amount of people and they only have so much to pay, everyone's going to take a pay cut. So I think that's sometimes lost in all this too. Something I made here, which I believe could be helpful. Where is it at here? Would be what I believe, I'll call it like the marriage coins or the gender coins, right? But these are things that are basic, and I think nature even teaches us, but I think this is basic to understanding a dynamic in marriage. It's definitely biblical. But you could even probably gather it from nature to some degree. And that is, that there's two sides to a coin for both the man and the woman in marriage, right? And so there's a positive, you might say, and a negative, even though both are actually positive. But there's kind of a drawback or something you have to give, basically, and something that is given to you. That's kind of given to you is the positive, something you have to give is the negative. That's the red. So for the male, the husband, the positive is you get authority. You are the authority of your household. You make the decisions. You're the head honcho. You're the big man on campus. Ultimately, Christ is, but you get the idea. You're under Christ. But the drawback is heavy is the head that wears the crown. You have the responsibility. And those two work off of each other, right? Why do you have the responsibility? Because you have the authority to ultimately set the direction of your household and make sure that things are honoring God and people are growing in their knowledge of God and practice. People are coming to know Christ, all these things. And why do you have the authority? Because you have the responsibility, because you bear the weight of responsibility, kind of ultimately to the direction of your family. That's why you have the authority to make decisions, because you need that authority in order to make sure you get in the direction that you need to go. If you have all of the responsibility for what happens, right or wrong, but none of the authority, that's just, wow, that's a tyranny. I'm blamed for everything, but I have no ability to make any decisions to change anything. That's great. That's wonderful. So that's the double side for men, right? And they play off each other. Which one came first? I don't know. But you have responsibility because you have authority, and you have authority because you have the responsibility. To have one without the other would be ludicrous. There'd be no checks and balances. If you had only the responsibility without the authority, you'd go crazy. If you had only the authority with no responsibility, well, we know that we're sinners. We'd become tyrants. Right? We would become tyrants. And that's why God has given us the responsibility. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, kind of the household. And for women, the same thing is true in terms of that double-sided coin. What's the positive? You get protection. What's the positive of protection? Here's what I will say about protection is I said it's heavy as the head that wears the crown. Women, you don't realize, I don't think women sometimes realize, and I don't realize 85% of what women go through, so I understand this. But I don't think women understand like the kind of lifelong pressure that's almost just built into the fabric of our nature as men, understanding that we have a responsibility and we can suppress that in our sin. We do suppress that, but we understand ultimately that we have a responsibility. And if society falls, it's because we were not there to do something. Like choices I made led to why my family didn't do XYZ, right? And so we have this pressure that maybe we put on ourselves, but ultimately it is God given, and it's actually it's a blessing, really. And the blessing for women is you don't have to bear that. Have you ever seen that as a blessing? I know sometimes it's viewed in our culture as a curse. It really is viewed as a curse by our feminist culture. But the fact that you don't have the authority ultimately in the household, I mean, of course Christ does, but you follow and obey your husband. The benefit you get of that is protection and not having to bear the type of burden that he bears. And that's huge. That's huge. And you can thank God for that. Just like the man can thank God for the authority that he's been given, because God has equipped him as a man to bear it, right? But God has not equipped the woman to bear that authority. Instead, you're protected as the weaker vessel. We see that in 1 Peter 3. What's the drawback of the other side of the coin? I'd say it's obedience, right? You get the protection, but because you don't bear the responsibility and you bear the benefit of following and being kind of covered by the strength of your husband, what do you owe? You owe obedience. And I wouldn't say these are actually negatives, the red. It's just the kind of the thing that you give, the other side of the coin. And again, these two work off each other. Because you have obedience, you also have the protection because you're not making the decisions. And so you're not blamed, basically, for what goes wrong. And because you have the protection, you have the benefit and the wonderful God-given role of being protected and cared for. You owe obedience to the one who's caring for you. And those, I see those as kind of the gender coins, but really the marriage double-sided coins. And maybe I'll keep referencing those over time because I find them to be basic, but also something that seems to be lost in our culture. Like there are certain things that as a man I don't have to deal with because I'm not a woman. and vice versa. And we ought to thank God for that, because there are there are things, I mean, physically, obviously childbearing, but certain things as a man, I am not designed to bear that a woman does, and vice versa. And that's a good thing. It'd be weird if I tried. It would go horrible. Let's see here. Brooks says, I feel like women in the workforce kind of took root during World War I or II. And then Joe says, I think to Brooke, yeah, replying, it was out of necessity since the men were fighting. Feminists co-opted afterwards and turned it into a rah-rah, we were strong nonsense. Yeah, Rosie the Riveter type stuff. Seems like, yeah. Let's see, yeah, mail rooms and mass production. I'm not sure which war facilitated which vocation, though. Brooks said, I remember when I was single and I was so unaware of the realistic dangers that were present in the world, made me thankful for a protective dad. Now that I'm married, thankful protective husband. That Haas of a plumber you got there, awesome guy that is Devin. Yeah, so I agree with what you guys are saying overarchingly. And again, Proverbs 31, it doesn't it's not like stunning to me that a woman can come into a workplace, like a lot of workplaces, and be competent. That's not really the point. It's about basically the competence to lead and provide over a long period of time. That's the difference, right? And because the Proverbs 31 woman, like she bought a field, she made this, she made that. Clearly, she's skilled and given much intellectual capacity by God, right? And so that's not the issue when it comes to men and women. It's about design and nature, like the male nature, the female nature, and therefore role. And women in the workplace, like as a career type of thing, usurps her role, and she will just become more and more unhappy and become less and less of actually the woman that God has created her to be. And so, instead of nurturing her children, caring for her, she's going to nurture the customers, the other employees or whatever. And that's not going to, that's just not going to cut it, because that's not the design. Aquila says, there's such a blessing, Brooke. I grew up without any rightly guided men around. I'm only now working out the realities of how messed up me prior to Christ reaching into my life. Amen. Aquila, I've asked you before, you've got to make it to the Laborers Conference in October. Brooke will be there. Joe will be there. I'll be there. Twitchy Theologian, who I'm sure you know of, be there. It'll be a great time. We're getting some signups here lately. And yeah, you got to make it. Should be fun. I want to meet people that I'll meet a few for sure already, but I want to meet more people that I've met, like their streams and stuff. It's really cool. I'll be there, says at Truth and Love Network. That is a sneaky little comment. That was a sneaky little slide into the main messages. Who is that? Is that Rob? Because if that is, we're in California. No, why are you out there? Don't you know that's sinful? I'm just kidding. What part of California are you guys in? I can't believe that. I thought you were like, I don't know, Illinois, or like, I don't know, like Indiana or something. Wow, you're way out there. Oh, yeah. Who's the Truth and Love Network? Who is this comment? This is sneaky. Well, who is this? Is that Rob? It was well played if it's Rob, because I did not see that coming. Vista, California. Okay. Well, maybe we'll have the sessions up online. So nonetheless, yeah, you'll be there in spirit, I hope. What's up, Rob? Rob of the Truth and Love Network is sneaking into the chat here. He is helping organize the conference in October, and is a good brother in the Lord. So yeah, works out in North Carolina, pastor in North Carolina, bivocational. And yeah, jelly. Jelly. I was born in LA and in San Diego forever. Save the brief stints in AZ. I visited Arizona once. I thought it was awesome. This was like 2 years ago. I was like, wow, I've never seen any kind of terrain like this. I'm from, Tennessee, so only lived in 2 states. And so, yeah, way different. It was awesome. Yeah, I hope this is helpful, though. The marriage, I'll probably change it to the marriage coins, but 2 sides of a coin, right? And I feel like it's so basic, and yet we don't acknowledge that these things, like, one works off the other, basically. And if we keep them both I think we both, like, men help keep one another in check, and women, like wives, can keep other women in check, by both of these things. Like, so if you're struggling as a man, be like, man, this is so hard, this is terrible, this is awful. Be like, well, remember, that you have something, you've been given something that your wife, your children don't have, and that's kind of the final authority in your household. Yes, that can be a huge responsibility, which goes with it, but this is a blessing too. You are here to cultivate and to take dominion just like Adam and to honor the Lord. And ultimately, God has given you in your male nature, and according to his word, the ability to carry this out by the power of the Spirit. Christ is capable. And so that's like, let's go on, men. And for women, if you're having a tough time, submitting to your husband, maybe he's not doing a great job leading. It definitely happens. Both happen. Women don't submit well, men don't lead well. You can remember, oh yeah, the protection thing. You know, that's a huge thing. There's one, my man actively protects me, by providing for me, by setting up systems in our household that will maintain good order. Prayerfully, he does that. But two, just the protection from having to wear that heavy crown, to wear that heavy mantle of authority and responsibility. Right now, that's a protection for you. Enjoy that. Right, that's a good thing. Right, some people who are just employees of a company, right, they're glad they're not the boss, because they don't want the responsibility that comes with it. So that can be a blessing. We can leave, Joe, but I also don't think anywhere is exempt from the rampant sinfulness of CA. We stay when we're planted till the Lord uproots us again. All right. Fair point. Nowhere is exempt indeed, says Joe. Yeah. And Joe, again, got the 2 compliments on his beard this evening. So, again, what is that? 14 compliments per your lifetime. So maybe by the time Joe, you depart and be with Christ, you'll be at like 50. Your final memoir will be like 50 compliments I received in the Lord. Like 37 of them are like, I love your beard, man. 5 of them are, you kind of look like Spurgeon, and it's like, wow, thanks, guys. If I get one more beard comment, that is true. That's a huge increase. That's right. All right. I wish. Let me see if is there something I can do here. Let's give it up for Joe. Is what I'm doing here. Oh, I don't have a clapping thing. Well, you'll be this. Whatever this is what you're getting. Yeah, that was for you, Joe. I thought I had clapping on there, but I guess I deleted it. Yeah. So I think that's all I really had. I really appreciate those who were able to be on here and might end up watching this later. So I think my next stream I want to do is early next week or maybe on the weekend, just regarding Paul Washer and some comments I've seen about him recently. So I really wanted to dive into that because I think it's interesting what people are saying about something he said to John MacArthur on his deathbed. And, I think it's worth talking about because these are 2 massive figures in evangelicalism and the overall kind of reformed Christianity in the last 20 years. And so I think it's worth talking about. Yes, sir. You too, Joe. Good to see you, brother. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Any last comments? I think next week on Thursday, I actually do plan to do Feminism 2, Second Wave. Second Wave. That's like the sequel. There we go, Brooke. I don't know, Akila. I don't think I'm at like the threshold to be able to receive super chats, but maybe at some point, So, I definitely learned that I like live streaming a lot because it's a lot more fun than. I mean, I like to film videos too, which I'll keep doing, but the live stream, it's easier to do like a presentation in my estimation. I don't know why that is, but I feel like it's a lot easier to formulate my thoughts than when I'm just filming. So that's my thought here. But thank you for the thought, Akila, very much. Did you ever watch Akila and the Bee, the spelling bee movie from like 20 years ago? Oh, this is unbelievable. Thank you so much. That's incredible. Thank you. I'll talk to you into the year, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Did you ever see Akila and the Bee? Akila, like the spelling bee? It's a really good movie with a Morpheus from I was gonna say Lord of the Rings, not Morpheus from the Matrix, not the Morpheus from Lord of the Rings. The other Morpheus was in it, and he like tutors a young spelling bee student to victory. It's great for the whole family. With Keke Palmer, that's right, with Keke Palmer, everyone's favorite Keke in the U.S. for sure. Well, thank you guys. I think I'll head off then. Appreciate you all very much. And what do I need to play us off with? How about some Neon Drive Retro Wave? What's that one? That's a good one. That's a good one to end on. Lawrence Fishburne. Wow, he's coming in third by Tila. Clutch. That one. Thank you, Tila. Thank you, Lawrence Fishburne, for being a good one. Thank you, Neo. We all love you, Sonu. Like you, Speed, also Speed.